The cameras were rolling. The most powerful man in New York, Alistair Devereux, was about to announce his $10 billion legacy. He placed a proud hand on his pregnant wife's stomach, smiling for the world. But his wife, Serafina, didn't smile back. She stepped to the microphone, her hands shaking, and delivered 3 sentences that didn't just end a marriage, they destroyed an empire. What did she know? And why did the world's most controlled man completely, violently lose his mind? Stay with us as we uncover the lie that brought a king to his knees. The Devereux penthouse on Central Park South was less a home than a mausoleum of modern art. The white marble floors clicked icily under Serafina Ashford Devereux's heels, a lonely sound in the cavernous, glass-walled space. The air was climate-controlled to a precise 68 degrees, not for her comfort or even the comfort of their unborn child, but for the preservation of the Francis Bacon triptych in the foyer and the Gerhard Richter that dominated the living room. It was a coldness that had seeped into her bones over 3 years of marriage, a sterile, museum-like silence, punctuated only by the distant, muted hum of the city 30 floors below, and Alistair's voice, which never seemed to rise above a controlled, boardroom monotone. Serafina was 7 months pregnant. The child, a boy, was already destined for greatness according to Alistair. He was the Devereux heir, a phrase Alistair used with the same proprietary pride as he used for his new Gulfstream G700 or his majority stake in Devereux Holdings. This morning, however, the silence was different. It was heavy, charged. Alistair was in his study, a chamber of polished mahogany and smoked glass, practicing his speech. Today was the most important day of his public life. The launch of the Devereux Legacy Fund, a $10 billion philanthropic pledge that would, in the words of his PR chief, redefine 21st century charity and, not coincidentally, scrub his reputation clean from a recent, brutal corporate takeover. Serafina stood in their bedroom, a room so vast it felt empty, even when full of priceless antiques. She was looking not at her reflection, but at the iPad she held in trembling hands. It was Alistair's personal device, the one he thought was secured by facial recognition and a complex alphanumeric password. But Alistair, a man who could anticipate global market shifts, had made one critical, arrogant mistake. He underestimated his wife. He assumed her background in art history made her a beautiful, simple creature. He forgot that her mind, the mind that could trace the provenance of a lost Caravaggio, was built on an obsession with detail. She hadn't been looking for anything. Not really. She had just been trying to find the restaurant reservation for their anniversary dinner last week, a dinner he had cancelled for a last-minute board call. But she had found something else. A folder, hidden within a decoy finance app, labelled Project Legacy. It wasn't philanthropy. It was a string of encrypted emails with a private clinic in Zurich, Switzerland. It was invoices for procedures Serafina had never heard of. It was genetic sequencing charts. And then the final document, the one that made her physically sick, a comprehensive medical file. It was her medical file. She saw dates and times she had supposedly been at this clinic, but she'd never been to Zurich. She'd been in New York at her regular OB-GYN appointments with Dr. Peterson. Then she cross-referenced the dates. They were the same dates. The blood drained from her face. The prenatal vitamins Dr. Peterson prescribed. The enhanced nutrient IVs. Alistair's private concierge doctor, Dr. Martin Cole, insisted she take weekly for the baby's health. The blood samples they took every single time, citing her high-risk pregnancy, though she was perfectly healthy. It wasn't vitamins. It wasn't standard procedure. The file detailed an experimental, highly illegal gene editing protocol. Subject, S. Devereux. Fetus, A. Devereux de Stone. They weren't just monitoring the baby, they were altering him. The emails from Alistair were terrifyingly precise, demanding elimination of genetic markers for addictive personality and enhancement of cognitive spatial reasoning. But the worst part, the part that stopped her heart, was a single line in an email from Alistair to the clinic's director. The maternal flaws, see Ashford family history, psychological, must be suppressed at all costs. The carrier's health is secondary to the success of the primary subject. The carrier. She wasn't his wife. She wasn't even a mother. She was a vessel, a carrier. Her family history, her mother's depression, her grandfather's struggle with alcohol after the war, were flaws he was suppressing. He was risking her life and the sanctity of their child's to design a perfect heir, a son without the messy, human imperfections of her bloodline. A cold, clarifying rage settled over her. The love she thought she had, or the comfortable, safe affection she had mistaken for love, evaporated, leaving behind the hard, sharp edges of betrayal. Alistair's voice boomed from the doorway. "Serafina, you're not dressed." She quickly locked the iPad and set it down, her heart hammering against her ribs. He stood there, already in his custom Tom Ford suit, a dark navy pinstripe. Alistair Devereux was a strikingly handsome man, with sharp, patrician features and eyes the color of cold steel. He didn't just enter a room, he occupied it, displacing the air. "The car is downstairs. Gregory is having a meltdown about the Times reporter. I need you on that stage in 20 minutes. He wasn't asking, he was commanding. "Alistair," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I don't feel well. I don't think I can go." His face hardened instantly. The mask of the charming philanthropist fell away, revealing the ruthless CEO beneath. "Don't be ridiculous. You're pregnant, not dying. You are the centerpiece of this announcement. A man, his pregnant wife, his legacy. It's the narrative. You will be there, you will smile, and you will look adoringly at me when I speak about our son. Is that understood?" She looked at him, really looked at him. Perhaps for the first time, she saw the man who called her a carrier. "Yes," Serafina said, the word tasting like ash. "It's understood. I just need a moment to get ready." 15 minutes. He turned and left, his footsteps echoing on the marble. The moment he was gone, Serafina walked to her jewelry box. She pulled out her phone, a simple, non-networked burner phone she'd bought for cash 6 months ago, after a flicker of suspicion she'd dismissed as paranoia. She dialed the only number in its contacts. It rang once. "Camilla, it's me. He's gone. I'm on my way." "Yes, I have it. I have all of it. He has no idea. He just called me the centerpiece. He's about to find out exactly what kind of centerpiece I am." She hung up, took a deep, shuddering breath, and walked into her closet. She didn't choose the soft beige maternity dress Alistair had laid out. She chose a dress the color of blood. The grand ballroom at the Pierre Hotel was suffocating. It was a circus of high-stakes media, a fever dream of flashing camera bulbs, booms mics hovering like metallic vultures, and the low, anxious hum of hundreds of people. The air smelled of stale coffee, expensive perfume, and corporate desperation. Gregory Shaw, Alistair's perpetually panicked head of public relations, was buzzing near the entrance, his face pale and slick with sweat, whispering frantically into a headset. "No more questions about the Apex acquisition. This is philanthropy, 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 and I want Sarah Jensen from the Times in the front row. She's the one we need to flip." Serafina arrived through a private entrance, flanked by 2 of Alistair's personal security team, men she realized were not there to protect her, but to handle her. She felt like a show pony being led to the ring. Her red dress was a stark, defiant slash of color against the ballroom's muted gold and cream decor. She was composed, her face a mask of serene neutrality, but inside, her entire nervous system was screaming. Her hand rested on the slight swell of her stomach, a protective, primal gesture. This was no longer about her. It was about the child she had to save from its own father. Alistair was already on the dais, schmoozing with the mayor and a few select board members. He saw her, and his eyes lit up, not with love, but with approval. The red dress was bold. It would play well on camera. He gestured for her to join him, his smile a brilliant, predatory flash of white. "There she is," he said, his voice amplified by the microphone as he took her hand. The crowd applauded. "My beautiful wife, Serafina." "Glowing, isn't she?" He pulled her to his side, his arm a possessive steel band around her waist, his hand splaying possessively over their child. Serafina smiled. It was the best performance of her life. She let him guide her to her seat, a plush velvet chair just behind the imposing mahogany podium bearing the new Devereux Legacy Fund logo. "Ladies and gentlemen of the press, members of the board, esteemed guests," Alistair began, his voice resonating with practiced sincerity. He was a master. He spoke for 20 minutes, weaving a tapestry of compassionate capitalism. He talked about his own humble beginnings, a complete fabrication. His father had left him $500 million, and his profound, newly discovered need to give back. "Legacy isn't about the buildings we put our names on," he said, his eyes scanning the front row, locking with Sarah Jensen's. "It's not about the bottom line or the Q4 earnings. It's about the future. It's about the world we leave for our children." As if on cue, he turned and gestured to Serafina. "When I learned I was going to be a father, when my brilliant, wonderful wife Serafina told me we were bringing a son into this world, everything changed." Serafina felt the cameras swing to her. She kept the smile plastered on her face, a brittle, fragile thing. "This $10 billion fund," Alistair continued, his voice thick with performative emotion, "is not just my legacy. It is his. It is a promise to my unborn son that the Devereux name will stand not just for power, but for progress, for health, for a better, stronger future." The room erupted in applause. Alistair basked in it, raising his hands. He looked invincible, a modern-day king bestowing his grace upon the masses. Gregory Shaw was practically weeping with relief off stage. "And now," Alistair said, turning to her, his eyes shining with triumph, "I want to invite the woman who made all this possible, the love of my life and the mother of my heir, Serafina, to say a few words." He stepped back, gesturing for her to take the podium. This was part of the plan. She was supposed to read a short, pre-written speech from a note card, thanking him for his generosity and vision. Gregory Shaw had written it himself. Serafina stood. The ballroom fell silent. The hundreds of cameras refocused, their lenses like a firing squad. She felt a bead of sweat trace its way down her spine. She walked the few steps to the podium, the clicking of her heels the only sound. Alistair gave her a supportive wink, a grotesque parody of a loving husband. She reached the microphone. She looked out at the sea of expectant faces. She saw Sarah Jensen, pen poised. She saw the TV cameras with their glowing red live lights. She saw Alistair, smiling, radiant in his arrogance. And then she saw Camila Rodriguez, her friend, and, as of this morning, her lead counsel, standing quietly at the back of the room, next to the main exit. Camilla gave her a single, almost imperceptible nod. Serafina took a deep breath. She looked down at the note cards Gregory Shaw had given her, the saccharine, empty words blurring before her eyes, With a flick of her wrist, she slid the note cards off the podium. They fluttered silently to the floor. A nervous cough rippled through the press corps. Beside her, Alistair's smile tightened by a fraction. "My wife, a believer in speaking from the heart," he ad-libbed, a hint of steel in his voice. Serafina leaned into the microphone. Her voice was low, clear, and carried to every corner of the room. "Thank you, Alistair," she began, her eyes locking onto his. "You've always been a master of public perception, a true artist of the narrative." Alistair's smile vanished. This was not the script. "You stand here today and speak of legacy," Serafina continued, her voice gaining strength. "You speak of children and you speak of the future. But the one thing you are truly an expert in is fraud." The silence in the ballroom was no longer respectful. It was a vacuum, sharp and absolute, sucking all the air from the room. Hundreds of people held their breath simultaneously. Gregory Shaw, in the wings, looked like he'd been shot. He lunged for the soundboard, whispering, "Cut the mic! Cut it!" But the tech, frozen in disbelief, just stared at the stage. Alistair's face, a moment ago so full of benevolent charm, had frozen. "Serafina!" he hissed, stepping toward her, his smile a grotesque, painted-on grimace. "What do you think you're doing? She's just a little overwhelmed." He laughed, a short barking sound. "The pregnancy hormones, you know." He reached for her arm. Serafina snatched it away as if he were on fire. "Do not touch me," she commanded, her voice amplified into a deafening boom. "And do not dare speak of my pregnancy." The cameras were no longer just flashing. They were a solid, blinding wall of light. The rapid clack-clack-clack of keyboards was the only sound. Sarah Jensen of the Times was typing so fast it looked like her fingers were blurring. "You're right about one thing, Alistair," Serafina said, turning back to the microphone, her gaze sweeping over the stunned audience. "This is about legacy, and it is about our child. Which is why I am announcing today, in front of God and all of you, that I am filing for divorce, effective immediately." A collective gasp, a roar of shouted questions, erupted. "Mrs. Devereux, what is she saying? Alistair, is this true?" Alistair's mask didn't just crack, it shattered. "Shut this down," he roared, not at Serafina, but at his staff. "Get her off the stage. She's unwell. She's having a breakdown." Two security guards started to move, but Serafina's voice stopped them cold. "If you take one more step, you will be named as accessories in the criminal complaint." The guards froze. All eyes snapped back to her. "Criminal complaint? Serafina, you are making the biggest mistake of your life," Alistair seethed, his voice a low, venomous promise, dangerously close to the live microphone. "You will leave this building with nothing. You will be destroyed." "You want to talk about destruction, Alistair?" She shot back, her voice ringing with cold fury. "Let's talk about Project Legacy. Let's talk about the Zurich Institute for Genetic Purity. Does that sound like philanthropy to any of you?" A new, more confused murmur went through the crowd. Sarah Jensen's head snapped up. She knew the name. She'd heard rumors of that clinic, whispers of eugenics and designer babies for the ultra-rich, but had never found a source. Alistair went white. He knew that name. He knew she could not possibly know that name. He lunged for the microphone bank, trying to physically rip it from the podium. "She's lying. She is profoundly ill. Someone call her doctor." "Oh, I'll be calling my doctors, Alistair," Serafina said, shrinking back from his lunge, her hand protectively on her stomach. "I'll be calling all of them, especially Dr. Martin Cole, the man who has been injecting me with experimental, non-FDA-approved genetic sequencing drugs for the last 4 months under the guise of prenatal vitamins. The room exploded. This was no longer a domestic dispute. This was a horror story. "She's insane!" Alistair yelled, his voice cracking, his polished composure completely gone. He was frantic, his eyes darting around, looking for an escape, for someone to fix this. She's been poisoned against me. By Marcus Thorne." It was a fatal mistake. Naming his biggest business rival, Marcus Thorne, in this context was a tactical blunder of catastrophic proportions. It instantly gave credibility to the idea that there was something to be poisoned against. "Mr. Devereux," shouted a reporter from the Wall Street Journal, "are you accusing Marcus Thorne of conspiring with your wife? What is your relationship with the Zurich clinic?" "What drugs, Mrs. Devereux?" yelled another. "What did he do to the baby?" "He didn't do it to the baby," Serafina's voice cut through the chaos, clear as a bell. "He did it for himself." She held up a single sheet of paper. The flashes illuminated it. It was the first page of the file, the one with the header, Project Legacy, A. Devereux Textur, and the subheader, Maternal Flaw Suppression Protocol. "My husband is not a philanthropist. He is a monster," she stated, her voice shaking but full of conviction. "He is obsessed with his own DNA. He is so terrified that his son might inherit his own father's alcoholism, or my mother's depression, so terrified of a human child, that he has been using me and our unborn baby as his personal science experiment." She looked directly at Alistair, her eyes filled with a mixture of pity and disgust. "You're not launching a legacy, Alistair. You're launching a master race. Starting with a son you tried to build like one of your skyscrapers, cold, perfect, and completely inhuman." Alistair stared at the paper in her hand. His face was no longer pale. It was a dark, mottled red. His chest was heaving, his billion-dollar suit suddenly looking like a straitjacket. He was trapped, illuminated by 1,000 lights, his deepest, darkest secret laid bare for the world. "You," he whispered, the word a rasp. "You bitch." He didn't lunge for the paper. He lunged for her. The attack was clumsy, a blind surge of pure aristocratic rage. Alistair Devereux, the man who dined with presidents and moved markets with a whisper, lunged at his pregnant wife in front of the world's media. He never reached her. Two figures intercepted him simultaneously. The first was his own security guard, finally snapping into action, grabbing his boss by the biceps. The second, shockingly, was Camila Rodriguez, who had sprinted from the back of the room, moving with the speed of a linebacker. She put herself directly between Alistair and Serafina, her arm outstretched. "Don't you touch her!" Camilla yelled, her voice raw. "Get her out of here!" Alistair bellowed, struggling against his own security. "Get them both out! This is a private matter!" "It stopped being a private matter," Camilla shouted back, pulling a small USB drive from her pocket. "When you committed multiple felonies, Mr. Devereux, including aggravated assault with a medical proxy and severe violations of federal human experimentation laws." The room was utter pandemonium. Reporters were standing on chairs, screaming questions. "What's on the drive? Who is she? Is that your lawyer?" "She's nobody," Alistair roared, his face contorted. He finally ripped free from his guard's grasp, but he was too late. Camilla had already tossed the USB drive to the front row. "Sarah Jensen, New York Times. That's the full file. The encrypted emails, the wire transfers to the Zurich clinic, and Dr. Cole's signature on the procurement forms for the illegal compounds. It's all there." Sarah Jensen caught the drive like it was a holy relic. She was already elbowing her way out of the ballroom, screaming at her editor on the phone. Alistair watched the drive disappear. He watched his life's work, his reputation, his entire meticulously crafted world walk out the door in the hands of the one reporter he could never control. This was the moment he truly lost control. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was a complete psychological disintegration. His mind, built on the infallible foundation of his own superiority, couldn't process this level of defeat. He, Alistair Devereux, had been outmaneuvered by her. "You think you've won?" he screamed, his voice pitching high and frantic. He wasn't talking to the press anymore. He was talking only to Serafina, who stood, protected by Camilla, watching him unravel. "You think you can take my son? You think you can walk away with my legacy?" He pointed a shaking finger at her stomach. "That is a Devereux. That is my blood. I built him, I perfected him. You are just the carrier," Serafina supplied, her voice quiet but amplified by the microphone she still stood before. That one word broke him. "I will sue you," he shrieked, his fists clenched at his sides. "I will take you to court. I will prove you are an unfit mother. I will prove you conspired with Thorn. I will. He was hyperventilating, his eyes wide and unseeing. "You'll what, Alistair?" Serafina asked, her voice dangerously calm. "You'll tell the judge you've been illegally experimenting on him. You'll tell the world you violated my body and his? What judge do you think will grant you custody?" "He's mine." It was a primal scream, a sound that came from the very depths of his ego. "He's not," Serafina said. It was so quiet, so simple, that the room, which had been a wall of noise, fell instantly silent again. Even Alistair paused his tirade, his mouth half open. "What?" he whispered. Serafina took a step forward, back to the podium. She looked at her husband, the man she once, briefly, thought she might love. The man who had just tried to assault her. "This is the part you never understood, Alistair," she said, her voice full of a sudden, profound sadness that was more cutting than her anger. "This is the twist you were too arrogant to see." She placed her hand on her stomach. "You were so obsessed with your bloodline, so obsessed with your own DNA, with passing on your superior genes and erasing my flaws. You spent millions, you broke dozens of laws, you violated my body, all to ensure the Devereux heir was perfect." She paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. "But you were too late, Alistair." She looked up, her eyes clear and unblinking, and delivered the killing blow. "The child I am carrying isn't yours." The silence that followed was not a vacuum. It was a physical weight, a dense, heavy thing that pressed down on every person in the room. Alistair Devereux froze, his body rigid, his arms still outstretched. The mottled red drained from his face, leaving a sickly, waxy pallor. His lips parted, but no sound emerged. He looked like a statue, a monument to his own spectacular ruin. The press was equally stunned. This was impossible. The story was already the biggest scandal of the decade. But this was a Greek tragedy. "What?" a reporter in the front row finally whispered, the word barely audible. "It's true," Serafina said, her voice resonating with the terrible calm finality of an executioner. She didn't look at the press. She looked only at Alistair, forcing him to see the truth in her eyes. "You remember before we were married, Alistair? You insisted on a prenuptial agreement. You insisted on a full medical workup. You were so thorough." He was still frozen, his mind clearly struggling to catch up with the reality that was crashing down upon him. "But I was thorough too," Serafina continued. "I had my own concerns. You spoke so often about your legacy, your blood." I worried. What if I couldn't perform? What if I couldn't provide the heir you so clearly demanded? She took a breath. "So I went to a fertility clinic. My own clinic. Not one of yours. Not one run by monsters. Just a simple, anonymous clinic. And I had tests done. All of them. She motioned to Camilla, who was now holding a new, thick manila envelope. Camilla didn't toss this one. She walked slowly, deliberately, to the podium and handed it to Serafina. "It turned out I was perfectly healthy," Serafina said. "But the doctors, they suggested that if I was worried about the pressure of conception, I should consider options, safeguards, for my own peace of mind." Alistair's eyes, wide and terrified, flicked to the envelope. He knew. In that instant, he knew. "You were so obsessed with your own genetic condition, the one you were hiding from me, the one you were trying to edit out of my son, that you never once considered a much simpler problem," Serafina said. She pulled the top sheet from the envelope. It was a lab report. "The condition you've been spending tens of millions to hide, Alistair, the one you were terrified of passing on, it doesn't just affect personality, does it? It affects everything. The clinic in Zurich, the one you paid to perfect your heir, was just taking your money. They were never going to succeed." She held up the report. "Your sperm count is 0, Alistair. It has been for at least a decade. You are, and have always been, completely sterile." The sound Alistair made was not human. It was a low, guttural, tearing sound, the sound of a man's entire identity being ripped from his body. "No," he whispered. "No, that's a lie. That's a forgery. That's Thorne's work. She's lying." "Am I?" Serafina said. "I went to a sperm bank, Alistair, an anonymous donor, a healthy man, a good man, according to his file, a teacher, someone who wanted to help a family, not build an empire." She placed her hand back on her stomach. "The son I am carrying is mine, but he has absolutely no connection to you, not by blood and certainly not by love. You have been building a legacy on a foundation that doesn't even exist." The implications hit the room like a shock wave. The Devereux heir wasn't a Devereux. The legacy fund was for a child that wasn't his. The illegal experiments were performed on a fetus that didn't even carry the genes he was trying to perfect. He had destroyed his company, his reputation, and his wife's health for a child that was, to him, a complete stranger. It was an irony so profound, so devastating, it was almost poetic. Gregory Shaw had collapsed in the wings. A medic was being called. Alistair Devereux simply stared at his wife's stomach, the focus of all his ambition. His face, which had cycled through charm, rage, and panic, was now utterly, terrifyingly blank. The lights were on, but no one was home. He had been so thoroughly, completely beaten that his mind had simply shut down. He looked at Serafina, his eyes empty. "My son," he whispered, one last time, a question. "No," Serafina said firmly. "My son, and you will never come near him." The dam of journalistic professionalism finally broke. It was a frenzy, a stampede. Reporters surged towards the stage, security guards forming a protective wall around Serafina and Camilla. Microphones were thrust forward. "Mrs. Devereux, who is the father? Alistair, is it true? Are you sterile? What will happen to Devereux Holdings? Are you pressing charges?" Alistair didn't hear any of it. He turned, slowly, like a man in a dream. He walked past his board members, who shrank away from him as if he were diseased. He walked past the chaos, past the screaming, past the wreckage of his life. He reached the edge of the dais, his movements stiff and robotic. And then his legs just gave out. He didn't faint. He crumpled. He collapsed onto the steps of the stage, his Tom Ford suit pooling around him, and stared blankly at the plush carpet, his hands limp at his sides. The great Alistair Devereux, the King of New York, the master of the universe, was broken. He hadn't just lost control. He had lost reality. Camilla put her arm around Serafina. "It's done," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Let's get you out of here." As security and Camilla escorted Serafina through the side exit, the last thing she saw was her husband, the man who wanted to build a perfect son, sitting catatonic on the floor, 1,000 cameras flashing in his empty eyes. The fallout was not a storm, it was an extinction-level event. Before Serafina and Camilla had even reached the black SUV waiting in the hotel's service alley, the New York Times website had a breaking banner. Devereaux heir a fraud. Wife alleges illegal genetic experimentation in explosive press conference. Husband Alastair Devereaux collapses. By the time they hit the FDR Drive, the stock for Devereaux Holdings, which Alastair had tied inextricably to his personal brand, had been halted by the Nasdaq. When it reopened an hour later, it didn't just drop. It evaporated. Billions in market value vanished in seconds. The story was a perfect, toxic cocktail of elements the media and the public couldn't resist. A billionaire's hubris, a scorned wife's revenge, a secret love child, and the terrifying, futuristic horror of designer babies and eugenics. Alastair was filmed being led from the Pierre, not in handcuffs, but in a way that was almost worse. He was flanked by paramedics, his face still vacant, his movements sluggish. He was transported, according to a source, to the private psychiatric wing of New York Presbyterian, under a 72-hour hold for extreme psychological distress. The king was in a padded room. The collateral damage spread instantly. Dr. Martin Cole was arrested at his Park Avenue practice within 3 hours, his record seized by the FBI. The Zurich clinic was raided by Swiss authorities, acting on an international tip from the FDA and Interpol. The Devereaux Holdings Board of Directors convened an emergency meeting and, in a unanimous vote that took less than 10 minutes, suspended Alastair Devereaux indefinitely as CEO and chairman, citing the morality clause in his own contract. And Marcus Thorne, the rival Alastair had so foolishly named. He was on television by 5 p.m., his face a mask of solemn concern. "This is a tragedy for the Devereaux family," he said, "but it is a greater tragedy for the market. It reveals a deep instability at the core of the company. My own firm, Thorne Capital, is, of course, prepared to step in and stabilize Devereaux Holdings, should the board require new leadership to protect shareholder interests." It was a bloodless coup, and Alastair had handed him the knife. But for Serafina, the victory was hollow. She wasn't celebrating. She was in a safe house, a nondescript brownstone in Brooklyn Heights, owned by Camilla's law firm. She spent the night not watching the news, but on the phone with a team of perinatologists, the best in the country, who were analyzing the files from the USB drive. "The compounds are aggressive," the lead doctor, a woman named Dr. Anya Sharma, told her over the phone, her voice grave. "They're designed to permeate the placental barrier. We've never seen anything like this used on a human subject. We need to get you in, immediately. We need to know what he did to you, and to the baby." The rage returned, colder this time. Alastair's final, unknowing act of cruelty was this. He had performed his monstrous experiments on a child that wasn't even his, potentially harming an innocent baby. And its mother. For nothing. The child of a school teacher from Ohio, a man who just wanted to help, was now carrying the toxic burden of Alastair Devereaux's ego. The next few days were a blur of medical tests, legal depositions, and quiet, terrified waiting. Serafina sat in sterile rooms, technicians and doctors drawing her blood, running ultrasounds, their faces carefully neutral. "The good news," Dr. Sharma finally told her, after 48 hours of agonizing uncertainty, is that the baby's core development looks normal. The compounds Dr. Cole was using were, for lack of a better word, experimental. But they were also, thank God, largely ineffective. It seems Alistair was being scammed by the Zurich clinic as much as he was trying to scam genetics. Serafina broke down, the sobs of relief racking her entire body. The baby was safe. Her baby was safe. But Serafina, Dr. Sharma said gently, we need to talk about you. Your blood work is concerning. The vitamin cocktail was not inert. It's put incredible strain on your kidneys and your liver. You are a high-risk pregnancy now, not because of your genetics, but because of what he did. We need to monitor you constantly. The fight wasn't over. It had just entered a new, more terrifying phase. Meanwhile, Alistair's 72-hour hold expired. But he didn't leave the hospital. His lawyers, the best and most ruthless firm in the city, had seen the writing on the wall. The SEC was indicting him. The FDA was indicting him. The Southern District of New York was indicting him. And that was all before Serafina's own civil suit. A criminal trial was unavoidable. But a man in a prison jumpsuit is a criminal. A man in a hospital gown is a patient. On the 5th day, Alistair's legal team filed a motion. Alistair Devereux was not fit to stand trial. He was, they claimed, suffering from a complete psychotic break, a man undone by the stress of his work and the betrayal of his wife. They painted Serafina as a calculating, monstrous gold digger who had faked a pregnancy with a donor, lied to her husband, and conspired with his rival to steal his company, a plot so cruel it had shattered his mind. "They're going to try and paint you as the villain," Camilla said, her face grim as she read the legal filing. "They'll say you drove him insane." "Let them," Serafina said, her hand on her stomach. She was sitting in the window of the brownstone, watching the rain fall. "He's the man behind the mask, Camilla. He showed the whole world who he was when he lunged at me. He showed them who he was when he screamed that I was a carrier. It doesn't matter what they say now. Everyone saw his real face. His lawyers are petitioning to have him moved to a private long-term care facility in Connecticut. Not a prison, not a state hospital, a country club with doctors." "It's still a cage," Serafina said, "and he built it himself." She knew, with chilling certainty, that Alistair wasn't faking his breakdown. A man like Alistair could survive prison. He could survive financial ruin. He could even survive public humiliation. But the one thing he could not survive, the one thing that could truly, fundamentally break him, was the knowledge that he was sterile, that his bloodline, the only thing he ever truly valued, ended with him. He had been rendered in his own mind completely and utterly pointless. The man behind the mask wasn't a king. He was just a terrified, empty shell, and Serafina had been the one to hold the mirror up to him. The winter that followed was brutal, but Serafina was safe. She had won her divorce settlement in a quiet, out-of-court proceeding. Alistair's lawyers, seeing the mountain of evidence against them and their client's non-responsive state, had folded. They hadn't fought for his assets. They had fought for his freedom, trading his fortune for an agreement from Serafina not to pursue additional criminal charges beyond what the state was already doing. She didn't take the penthouse. She didn't take the art. She didn't take a dime of Devereux Holdings' money. She took a single, lump sum payment, enough to ensure her child's future and her own, and walked away. She wanted nothing that carried his name. Alistair Devereux was never seen in public again. He was quietly moved to the private long-term care facility in Connecticut, a place called Silver Hill, where he would live out his days, attended by orderlies, staring at the manicured lawns. The great man of industry was gone, a ghost haunting his own empty legacy. Devereux Holdings was carved up and sold for parts, most of it absorbed by Marcus Thorne's company for pennies on the dollar. The Devereux name was removed from every building, every fund, every charity. Within a year, it was as if he had never existed. Spring came, and with it, new life. 2 months after the press conference, in a quiet, private room at the real New York Presbyterian, surrounded by Dr. Sharma and a team of specialists, Serafina gave birth to a healthy, screaming baby boy. He was beautiful. He was small, with a tuft of dark hair and a temper. And when he opened his eyes, they were a warm, clear brown. Not the cold steel of Alistair Devereux. Serafina named him Arthur. A simple, strong name. No middle name. No O2. Just Arthur Ashford. She moved out of the city. She bought a rambling, historic farmhouse in the Hudson Valley, a place with old trees and a wide porch. The sterile, cold silence of the penthouse was replaced by the sound of wind chimes, bird song, and soon a baby's laughter. Her life was no longer about galas or art auctions or maintaining an image. It was about 2 a.m. feedings and muddy walks, and discovering the simple, profound joy of watching her son learn to grasp her finger. One afternoon, 6 months later, she was sitting on a blanket in her yard, Arthur asleep on her chest. Camilla drove up, a bottle of wine in her hand. "Well," Camilla said, settling onto the blanket and pouring 2 glasses. "It's official. The SDNY just closed their case. Alistair has been declared permanently mentally incompetent. He'll never see the inside of a courtroom, or the outside of Silver Hill." Serafina nodded, gently rubbing her son's back. "It's done then. Really done." "It's done." Camilla took a sip of wine. "Was it worth it, Serafina? The terror, the scandal, all of it?" Serafina looked down at Arthur. She thought of the life he would have had. A life of cold precision, of being moulded and edited, of being owned by a man who saw him as a product. A life of perpetual pressure to be the Devereux heir. Then she looked at the life he had now. A life where he would be free to be human. Free to have flaws. Free to be happy. Free to be loved for who he was, not what he was made of. "You know," Serafina said, her voice soft, "Alistair was right about one thing. It was about legacy." She kissed the top of her son's head, breathing in the smell of baby powder and sunshine. "This is mine." She was no longer the billionaire's wife. She was just Serafina. And for the first time in her life, she was completely, wonderfully free. 4 years passed. The name Devereux was a scar on the face of New York finance, a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms, but no longer a headline. Alistair himself had faded from a man into a legal designation, permanently incompetent ward of the state. He resided at Silver Hill, but his mind resided elsewhere, in a fractured past no one could reach. He was, for all intents and purposes, gone. Serafina's life, in contrast, had bloomed. The farmhouse in the Hudson Valley was a true home, filled with the scent of baking bread, old wood, and the chaotic, wonderful clutter of a small child. Arthur Ashford was her entire world. He was a bright, laughing boy, with his donor father's warm brown eyes and a smile that lit up every room. He had Serafina's own curiosity, her love for stories and pictures. She had successfully built a fortress of normalcy around him, a life defined by muddy boots, finger painting, and trips to the local farmer's market, not by the cold, marble-floored prison of his conception. The trauma of those last months in New York had receded. The constant medical checkups for them both had, over time, yielded positive results. Arthur was exceptionally healthy. Seraphina's own health, while requiring monitoring, had stabilized. Dr. Sharma had declared them both, cautiously, in the clear. The largely ineffective cocktail of drugs, it seemed, had been a failed, monstrous experiment that left no lasting mark. Seraphina had allowed herself, finally, to believe it, until the day of the blocks. Arthur was 3, almost 4. Seraphina was in the kitchen, half watching him play in the living room while she prepped dinner. He was quiet, as he often was when he was concentrating. He was using a simple, old-fashioned set of wooden blocks. She smiled, hearing the soft click, click, click of the wood. "Mama, look," he said. Seraphina turned, wiping her hands on her apron. "What is it, sweet?" She stopped dead in the doorway. Her heart gave a single, painful jolt. He hadn't built a tower. He hadn't built a castle. On her antique rug, Arthur had constructed an elaborate, cantilevered bridge. It was perfectly balanced, using counterweights and trusses in a way that seemed to defy gravity. It was complex, elegant, and structurally ingenious. It was something a first-year engineering student would have struggled to design. A 3-year-old had built it from a box of 60 wooden blocks. It's beautiful, Arthur," she managed to say, her voice tight. "How did you do that?" Arthur didn't look up, already nudging a triangular block into a new position to extend the span. "The center of gravity was wrong," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "It needed a dual truss support to manage the load. It's simple." "It's simple." A cold sweat broke out on Seraphina's neck. She backed away, her hand finding the wall for support. It was just a bright boy. He was a gifted child. That's all it was. It wasn't that. That night she called Camilla, for the first time in months. "He built a bridge, Cam," she whispered, locked in her bathroom, the water running. "A bridge that... it wasn't normal." "Seraphina," Camilla said, her voice patient but firm. "He's a smart kid. You're a smart woman. He's allowed to be smart. You cannot let what that bastard did poison your joy. You can't spend your life looking for Alistair's ghost in your son's toy box. He's gone. You won. Remember that." Seraphina took a deep breath. Camilla was right. She was being paranoid. It was the anniversary of the press conference, and it was making her jumpy. She was projecting her fears. She hung up, splashed cold water on her face, and went to read Arthur his bedtime story. She would forget it. She managed to for 2 whole weeks. The following Saturday was warm, a perfect autumn day. She took Arthur to the local town park. He was laughing, chasing a yellow leaf as it skittered across the grass. He was her boy, just a normal, happy boy. He ran for the playset, a large wooden structure with a climbing wall and a high-set slide. "Be careful, sweetie," she called, setting her coffee on a bench. "I am always careful, Mama," he called back, his voice bright. She watched him scramble up the ladder. He was agile, confident. He reached the top platform, turned to wave at her. And in that split second, he misjudged his footing. He tripped over the edge of the slide entrance and fell. It was not a small tumble. He fell 6 feet, landing hard on the packed dirt and wood chips below. He landed directly on his left arm. Seraphina screamed. The sound was ripped from her throat. Her coffee cup went flying as she sprinted toward him, her mind flashing with images of hospitals, of blood, of everything she had fought to protect being shattered. "Arthur! Oh my God, Arthur! Baby!" She reached him in seconds, her heart exploding with terror. He was on the ground, pushing himself up. His left arm was wrong. It was hanging at an angle that made her physically ill. It was a clear, obvious break. She fell to her knees, hysterical, tears already blinding her. "It's okay, baby. Mama's here. It's okay. We're going to..." She stopped. Arthur was looking at her. His face was pale, but he was not crying. He was not screaming. There were no tears. He was looking at her, his brow furrowed, not in pain, but in confusion. "Arthur?" she whispered, her panic freezing into a new, far more terrible dread. He looked down at his arm, the one dangling at a grotesque angle. He seemed to study it with a kind of detached curiosity. "Mama," he said, his voice perfectly level, completely calm. "You are having an inefficient emotional response. Your vocalizations are not helpful. My humerus is fractured. We need to go to the hospital to get it set." Serafina's blood ran cold. She stared at her son, her 4-year-old son, who was clinically diagnosing his own severe injury without a single tear. Doesn't it hurt?" she choked out. Arthur tilted his head, as if she'd asked a peculiar question. "The nerve endings are sending strong pain signals to my brain." "Yes," he said, as if describing the weather. "But it is not a productive sensation. It is simply data. Can we go now? The risk of a compound fracture will increase with movement." He stood up, cradling his broken arm with his good one, and started to walk calmly toward the parking lot, leaving his mother kneeling in the dirt, staring after him in absolute horror. The doctor at the hospital was amazed. "I've never seen anything like it," the ER doctor told Serafina, who was sitting in the waiting room, shaking so hard she could barely hold the clipboard. "He's the toughest kid in the world. He just sat there while we set the bone. Didn't flinch, just watched. You've got a little stoic on your hands." Serafina just nodded, her stomach a knot of ice. She knew what Alistair had put in those files. Enhancement of cognitive spatial reasoning. That was the bridge, but there was the other part, the part she had focused on less. Suppression of maternal flaws. Her flaws, her mother's depression, her grandfather's weakness, her family's capacity for overwhelming emotion, for art, for passion, for pain. Dr. Sharma had been wrong. The experiment wasn't largely ineffective. It had been catastrophically, terrifyingly precise. Alistair had failed to build a genetic heir, but he had succeeded in something far more monstrous. He had put his mark on her child. She walked back into the exam room. Arthur was sitting on the table, his arm in a bright blue cast. He was swinging his legs, humming a tune from a cartoon. He looked normal. He smiled when he saw her. "Hello, Mama. They said I did well." Serafina's heart broke. She had saved her son from his father, but she hadn't saved him from his father's legacy. The battle wasn't over. It was just beginning. Alistair was in a padded room, but his ghost was here, in the room, looking at her through her own son's eyes, and she had no idea how to fight it. A story of incredible deceit and a mother's unbelievable courage. Serafina Devereux walked into that press conference as a billionaire's wife, a centerpiece for his ego. She walked out as a free woman and a protector for her unborn son. She proved that the most dangerous secrets are the ones hidden behind a perfect public image, and that sometimes the only way to escape a gilded cage is to burn it to the ground. What did you think of Serafina's incredible final move? Was Alistair's fate deserved? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. This story took a lot of research to piece together, and if you enjoyed it, please show your support by hitting that like button, sharing this video with someone who loves a story of justice, and most importantly, click subscribe and ring that bell. You won't want to miss the next story we uncover. Have you ever been told you weren't enough? that your dreams were too small, your presence too quiet, your very being replaceable? For Olivia Washington, these weren't just fears. They were the final, cutting words from the man she'd given her life to. Her husband, Mark, cast her aside for a younger, shinier model, leaving her with nothing but the echo of his cruelty. He thought he had broken her, reducing her from a brilliant architect to a forgotten memory. But he made one fatal mistake. He never imagined that the woman he threw away would be found by a man who saw her worth not in gold, but in genius. And when she returned, not as a victim, but as a titan of industry on the arm of a reclusive billionaire, the entire world that once scorned her would be forced to gasp in stunned silence. This is the story of how a broken heart became an unbreakable empire. The clinking of champagne glasses was the only sound that could momentarily silence the low hum of self-congratulation in Mark Sterling's penthouse. From their perch on the 50th floor, the lights of downtown Chicago sprawled like a carpet of scattered diamonds, a kingdom Mark was convinced he was born to conquer, and by his side was his queen, Olivia Washington. To the outside world, they were the perfect couple. He, the charismatic, shark-toothed real estate developer. She, his elegant, intelligent, and impeccably supportive wife. Olivia moved through the party with a practiced grace, her smile a beautiful, carefully constructed mask. She refilled a glass for a potential investor, laughed at the predictable joke of a city councilman, and subtly steered conversations toward Mark's latest project, the monolith of glass and steel they were currently standing in, Sterling Tower. "She's a marvel, isn't she?" Mark boomed to his associate David, clapping him on the back while his eyes followed Olivia. Always knows what to say. The perfect hostess. David nodded, but he had known them for years. He'd seen the late nights Olivia spent poring over blueprints, her pencil flying across the page, transforming Mark's clunky, derivative ideas into something elegant and functional. He'd heard her whisper suggestions about structural integrity and aesthetic flow, only to watch Mark present them as his own in boardrooms the next day. Olivia was more than a hostess. She was the ghost in his machine, the silent architect of his success. Later that evening, after the last guest had departed, leaving behind the scent of expensive perfume and stale ambition, the mask began to crack. Olivia was stacking plates in the cavernous kitchen, the silence of the apartment amplifying the hollowness she felt. "Leave that," Mark said, waving a dismissive hand. "The cleaning service will get it in the morning." He loosened his tie, his face flushed with alcohol and victory. "The Hamiltons are in. That's another $10 million in funding locked down. You were great tonight, Liv. A real asset." The word asset landed like a stone in her stomach. She turned from the sink, her hands still damp. "Mark, I wanted to talk to you about the lakeside development. I had an idea for the green roofing system. If we integrate solar paneling with a rainwater reclamation system, we could make the entire building self-sustaining. It would be revolutionary." Mark sighed, the indulgent smile slipping from his face. He ran a hand through his perfectly coiffed hair. "Liv, baby, we've been over this. Revolutionary doesn't sell. Stable, profitable, and familiar sells. Leave the big ideas to me, okay? You're brilliant at the details, the soft touches. That's your strength." It was the same condescending pat on the head she'd been getting for a decade. Every time her ambition flared, he was there with a bucket of cold water to douse it. She had graduated top of her class from Columbia's School of Architecture, a prodigy with a sketchbook full of innovative, eco-conscious designs. But she had fallen in love with Mark Sterling, a man whose ambition was a roaring fire that consumed everything around it, including her own. She had convinced herself that supporting him was a form of success, that his victories were hers. Now, she wasn't so sure. "My soft touches are what made the lobby of this building work, Mark," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Your original design was a wind tunnel. People would have lost their hats walking through the door." He stiffened, his jaw tightening. "Are we really doing this tonight? After a huge win?" "I'm tired, Olivia. Can't you just be happy for us?" Before she could answer, his phone buzzed on the marble countertop. He glanced at the screen, and a subtle, almost imperceptible shift occurred in his expression. It was a softness she hadn't seen directed at her in years. "I have to take this," he said, already turning away. "It's about the zoning permits for the West Loop project." He walked out onto the balcony, closing the glass door behind him. Olivia watched his silhouette against the city lights. She saw him smile into the phone, a genuine, unguarded smile. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous, boyish gesture she remembered from their early days of dating. It was a gesture of affection, and she knew, with a sudden, gut-wrenching certainty, that he wasn't talking about zoning permits. The end came a week later. It wasn't a quiet, dignified conversation. It was a public execution. Mark had insisted on hosting a small, intimate dinner party with their closest friends, the same friends who had witnessed her devotion and his casual appropriation of her talent for years. He waited until the dessert plates were cleared. He stood up, tapped his glass with a fork, and smiled that predatory smile that investors found so compelling and she now found so chilling. "Friends," he began, his voice smooth as silk, "Olivia and I have some news. We've had an incredible 10 years together. We've built an empire." He gestured around the opulent room, but sometimes even the strongest foundations need to be re-evaluated. A confused silence fell over the table. Olivia's heart began to hammer against her ribs. She looked at him, her eyes pleading, but he wouldn't meet her gaze. "I've realized I want something different. Something more," he continued. "And so, Olivia and I are separating." A collective gasp went through the room. David looked at Olivia, his face a mask of shock and concern. "What are you talking about, Mark?" Olivia whispered, her voice trembling. He finally looked at her, and his eyes were cold, devoid of any warmth or history. "It's over, Liv. I'm in love with someone else." He didn't have to say who. At that moment, the doorbell chimed. A young woman was shown in by the doorman. She was barely 25, with blonde hair that cascaded down her back and a dress that looked like it had been poured onto her. It was Isabella Vance, the daughter of his biggest rival, a socialite famous for her Instagram feed and her father's fortune. She walked straight to Mark's side, slipping her arm through his. She looked at Olivia with an expression of mild pity, as if she were looking at an outdated piece of furniture. "Everyone, this is Isabella," Mark announced, his voice filled with a sickening pride. The humiliation was a physical force, pressing down on Olivia, stealing the air from her lungs. Their friends sat frozen, their faces a mixture of horror and morbid curiosity. She stood up, her chair scraping against the marble floor. "How could you do this?" she managed to say, her voice cracking. Mark's face hardened. The charming facade fell away, revealing the ugly, insecure man beneath. "Look around you, Olivia. This is a world of power, of image, of forward momentum. You've become comfortable. Your little sketches, your eco-friendly daydreams, they're nice, but they're not going to keep us at the top. Isabella understands that." He looked from Isabella's flawless face back to Olivia's, which was now streaked with tears. "Frankly, you're just not enough anymore. You're holding me back." The words struck her with the force of a physical blow. Not enough. After all the nights she'd stayed up, refining his clumsy work, boosting his fragile ego, sacrificing her own career. Not enough. She looked at the faces of their friends, who were now pointedly avoiding her eyes, already calculating the social cost of taking her side. In that moment, she was utterly, devastatingly alone. With a choked sob, she turned and fled the apartment, leaving behind the sound of Mark Sterling's laughter as he comforted his new prize. She ran past the doorman, out into the cold Chicago night, with nothing but the clothes on her back and his final, brutal words echoing in her soul. The first few weeks were a blur of grey, muted survival. The world Olivia had known, the world she had helped build, vanished overnight. The joint bank accounts were frozen, the credit cards were cancelled, the locks on the penthouse were changed. Mark's lawyers were swift and brutal, delivering a lowball divorce settlement that was more insult than offer, contingent on her signing a non-disclosure agreement that would effectively erase her contributions to his company. Her friends, the same people who had eaten her food and admired her home, fell silent. Her calls went to voicemail. Her texts were left on read. She was no longer Mrs. Sterling, the wife of a titan. She was a liability, a piece of discarded history. David was the only one who called. He was furious on her behalf, but he had a family and a mortgage tied to Mark's company. "I'm so sorry, Liv," he'd said, his voice heavy with guilt. "He's threatening to ruin anyone who helps you." She understood. Or at least she tried to. The penthouse was replaced by a cramped, third-floor walk-up in a neighborhood that smelled perpetually of damp concrete and fried onions. The custom-designed walk-in closet was replaced by a single, rickety wardrobe. The floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city were replaced by a single grimy window that looked out onto a brick wall. For a month, she barely left the apartment. Grief was a heavy, suffocating blanket. It wasn't just the loss of her marriage, it was the loss of her identity. For 10 years she had been Mark's partner, his shadow, his secret weapon. Without him, who was she? His voice was a constant, venomous whisper in her mind. "You're not enough. You're holding me back." The small savings she had in a personal account from before her marriage began to dwindle. The fear that followed the grief was a sharper, more immediate pain. She had to work. But the architectural world was small and insular. Mark Sterling's name carried weight, and the story he was spinning was that of a bitter, uninspired wife he had generously supported. Every major firm she applied to either didn't respond or sent a polite, form letter rejection. Finally, out of desperation, she took a job at a small, struggling firm called Urban Constructs. It was a humbling, soul-crushing blow. She, a Columbia graduate who had secretly designed award-winning buildings, was now a junior draftsperson, earning a pittance to make minor revisions to uninspired strip mall designs. Her boss, a perpetually stressed man named Mr. Henderson, had no idea who she was. He just saw a woman in her mid-30s, overqualified on paper, but with a 10-year gap in her portfolio. Her days were spent in a drab, windowless office, hunched over a computer, adjusting the placement of HVAC units and ensuring bathroom layouts were up to code. It was mechanical, joyless work. Her creative spirit, the part of her that could see cathedrals in empty lots, began to wither. One evening, unpacking the last of the few boxes she'd been allowed to retrieve from her old life, her fingers brushed against a familiar cardboard tube. She pulled it out and unrolled the contents on her small, second-hand coffee table. It was her senior thesis project from college, the original blueprints for the Ethelgard Community Hub. It was the design she was most proud of, a revolutionary concept for a self-sustaining community center built from reclaimed materials, featuring a rooftop garden, a water reclamation system, and passive solar heating. It was designed to be a living, breathing heart for a neglected community. When she had shown it to Mark years ago, full of hope and excitement, he had patted her cheek and called it a childish dream. He'd told her to focus on the real world, the world of glass towers and billion-dollar deals. Looking at the elegant lines and intricate notes on the blueprint, a flicker of the old Olivia, the passionate, brilliant creator, stirred within her. A deep, aching sadness washed over her. That woman was gone, buried under a decade of compromise and a mountain of heartbreak. With a sigh, she began to roll the blueprints back up. But then she stopped. Her eyes fell on one of the notes in the margin, written in her own youthful, confident script. Architecture is not about creating monuments to wealth, but about building shelters for the human spirit. The words resonated in the silent, lonely apartment. She looked around at the peeling paint, at the water stain on the ceiling, at her reflection in the dark window. A tired, defeated woman. Was this the shelter she had built for her own spirit? Something shifted inside her. It wasn't a sudden explosion, but a quiet, tectonic realignment. The grief was still there, as was the humiliation. But beneath it, a new feeling began to crystallize. Anger. Cold, hard, and clarifying. Mark had taken her name, her home, her money, and her confidence. But he couldn't take this. He couldn't take the genius that was locked inside her mind. She left the blueprints unrolled on the table. That night, for the first time in months, she didn't dream of Mark or the penthouse. She dreamed of building. The anger became a quiet fuel. It got her out of bed in the morning. It pushed her through the monotonous days at urban constructs. And at night, it drove her back to the blueprints of the Ethelgard hub, spread across her floor like a sacred text. The design was more than just a college project. It was the purest expression of her architectural philosophy. It was everything Mark had mocked, and everything she still believed in. Her job, as soul-crushing as it was, provided an unexpected opportunity. Mr. Henderson, buried under paperwork for a new suburban library, tossed a file onto her desk. "Washington," he grunted, not looking up from his computer. "The city wants a preliminary report on derelict industrial sites for potential rezoning. It's grunt work. Just catalogue the properties, note the square footage and current ownership. I need it by Friday." For the next few days, Olivia sifted through mind-numbing data on forgotten warehouses and abandoned factories. It was a graveyard of industry. Then, one name caught her eye. The old Hawthorne Mill. It was a sprawling, red-brick complex on the south side of the river, a relic of the city's industrial past that had been sitting vacant for over 30 years. Most people saw it as an eyesore, a candidate for demolition. But as Olivia looked at the satellite images and the original structural plans, she saw something else. She saw strong bones, soaring interior spaces, and a waterfront location that was criminally undervalued. She saw potential. An idea, thrilling and terrifying, began to take shape. What if she could adapt her Ethelgard design for the Hawthorne Mill? The multi-level structure of the mill was perfect for the tiered community spaces she had envisioned. The vast open floors could become workshops, art studios, and a public market. The sturdy roof was ideal for the greenhouse and solar array. The spark was ignited. Every night after work, Olivia's small apartment transformed into a clandestine design studio. She subsisted on coffee and toast, pouring every ounce of her remaining energy into the project. She wasn't just adapting her old design, she was elevating it, using the 10 years of practical, albeit uncredited, experience she'd gained. She integrated new technologies, refined the energy systems, and created a design that was not only beautiful and sustainable, but also economically viable for a revitalized community. The Hawthorne Mill project became her obsession, her lifeline. The final piece of the puzzle was ownership. According to the city records, the mill and the surrounding 20 acres were owned by a holding company. It was an unusual name, one she didn't recognize from the city's roster of major developers, Thorne Industries. Her research into Thorne Industries hit one dead end after another. They had no public profile, no flashy website, no press releases. They were a ghost, a name on a deed and nothing more. The company seemed to acquire undervalued land with long-term potential, and then simply sit on it. It was a bizarre business model, patient and silent. Olivia knew the odds were astronomical. Major development proposals were handled by teams of lawyers and executives, not by a lone, unemployed architect working on a second-hand laptop in a tiny apartment. Submitting a proposal blindly to a mysterious corporation was a fool's errand. It was a desperate, hopeless shot in the dark. And that's exactly why she had to do it. She spent 2 weeks compiling her proposal. It was a masterpiece. She included detailed renderings she created herself, comprehensive budget projections, and a passionate, compelling mission statement about the power of architecture to heal communities. She poured all of her pain, her anger, and her defiant hope into its pages. It was her soul bound in a presentation folder. Finding an address for Thorne Industries was nearly impossible, but she eventually tracked down a post office box listed in their corporate filings. With a trembling hand, she packaged her proposal, paid the extra fee for delivery confirmation, and sent her message in a bottle out into the vast, indifferent ocean of the business world. Then she waited. Days turned into a week, then 2. The delivery confirmation had come through, but the silence from Thorne Industries was absolute. The initial adrenaline of her bold move faded, replaced by the familiar, dull ache of disappointment. The dream that had sustained her began to feel foolish again, another one of her childish daydreams, as Mark would have said. The weight of her reality, the dreary job, the lonely apartment, the looming bills, pressed down on her once more. One rainy Saturday afternoon, seeking refuge from the oppressive silence of her apartment, Olivia found herself in a small, independent coffee shop in a neighborhood she rarely visited. It was a cozy place, filled with the scent of roasted coffee beans and the quiet murmur of conversation. She found a small table in the corner and took out her sketchbook, a habit she was trying to revive. She wasn't working on the mill project. That was too painful. Instead, she was sketching a simple cantilevered bridge, losing herself in the clean lines and the physics of tension and compression. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't notice the man approaching her table until he spoke. "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" She looked up. He was tall, with a kind, intelligent face, and eyes the color of warm whiskey. He was dressed in a simple grey Henley and worn jeans, a stark contrast to the tailored suits she was used to. There was an unassuming quietness about him. "No, it's not," she said, gesturing to the empty chair. He sat down, placing his own laptop and a mug of black coffee on the table. "Thanks, it's packed in here today." They fell into a comfortable silence for a few minutes. Olivia returned to her sketch, but she was aware of his presence. He wasn't looking at his laptop. Instead, he seemed to be looking out the window at the rain, lost in thought. Then came the small, clumsy accident that would change everything. As he reached for his mug, his elbow knocked against his laptop, sending it sliding toward the edge of the small table. He lunged to catch it, but in doing so, his hand hit his coffee, sending the dark liquid splashing across the table and directly onto Olivia's open sketchbook. "Oh my God, I am so sorry," he said, jumping up. He grabbed a handful of napkins and began to blot at the spreading brown stain, his face a mask of genuine mortification. "I am so sorry. Your drawing, it's ruined." Olivia looked at the warped, stained page. A week ago, this small disaster might have felt like the final straw, another sign that the universe was against her. But today, looking at this stranger's sincere, panicked apology, she felt an unexpected urge to laugh. "It's okay," she said, and she was surprised to find that she meant it. It was just a sketch, a study in stress distribution. He stopped dabbing at the page and looked at her, his brow furrowed. "Stress distribution. Are you an engineer?" "An architect," she corrected gently. "Or I was. I am." A look of genuine interest lit up his face. "Really? That's fascinating." He gestured to the stained drawing. "You were modeling the load-bearing points on a cantilever. The arching is elegant, but you could probably reinforce the anchor point with a deeper foundation pier to counteract the torque." Olivia stared at him, stunned. He wasn't just looking at a pretty picture of a bridge. He was seeing the mechanics behind it. He was speaking her language. "You know about architecture?" she asked, intrigued. He gave a small, self-deprecating smile. "I'm a hobbyist. I like systems, how things fit together. Whether it's code or concrete, the principles are often the same." For the next hour, they forgot about the spilled coffee. They talked, not just polite small talk, but a real, deep conversation. He asked her about her passion for architecture, and for the first time in years, she spoke about it freely, without the shadow of Mark's condescension. She told him about her belief in sustainable design, in buildings that served communities instead of just egos. He listened with an unnerving intensity, his gaze never leaving her face. He asked sharp, insightful questions that pushed her to articulate her ideas more clearly than she ever had before. His name was Ethan. He told her he was a programmer, which seemed to fit his quiet, analytical nature. When she described her dream project, a community hub built in an old, abandoned industrial space, his expression became even more focused. "That's not just a building," he said, his voice soft. "That's an ecosystem. You're not just providing shelter, you're creating a platform for people to build their own futures. It's brilliant." No one had ever called her ideas brilliant. Mark had called them cute, nice, sweet. Ethan's simple, sincere validation was like water on parched earth. When she finally looked at the clock, she was shocked to see that 2 hours had passed. "I should get going," she said, a note of regret in her voice. "Wait," Ethan said, a hint of urgency in his tone. "I know this is forward and I completely ruined your sketchbook, but would you be willing to meet again? I'd love to hear more about your work. I could buy you a new sketchbook to make up for this one." Olivia felt a flutter of something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. A genuine, uncalculated spark of human connection. "I'd like that," she said, a real smile gracing her lips for the first time in what felt like an eternity. They exchanged numbers. As she walked home in the rain, she didn't even feel the cold. For the first time since her life had fallen apart, she wasn't thinking about her past. She was thinking about the future. Over the next 2 weeks, Olivia and Ethan met 3 more times. They went for a walk along the riverfront, visited an architectural salvage yard, and spent another long afternoon in the same coffee shop. With each meeting, Olivia felt more like her old self. Ethan was a mirror, reflecting a version of her she thought was lost forever. A passionate, brilliant, and interesting woman. He was an enigma. He was clearly intelligent, well-read, and had a deep understanding of complex systems, yet he spoke about his work as a programmer in the vaguest of terms. He lived a simple life, or so it seemed. He dressed in unassuming clothes, drove a modest electric car, and seemed to prefer quiet, out-of-the-way places. But there was a depth and a quiet confidence to him that hinted at something more. Olivia didn't press. She was simply grateful for his company, for the way he looked at her when she talked about her designs, as if she were revealing the secrets of the universe. She found herself telling him everything. She told him about Mark, about the humiliation and the betrayal. She told him about her struggles to find work, about the soul-crushing job at Urban Constructs, and she told him about her wild, desperate moonshot, the proposal she had sent to the mysterious Thorn Industries. "I haven't heard anything back," she admitted, stirring her tea. "It was probably a stupid idea. They probably threw it in the trash without even looking at it." Ethan looked at her, his expression unreadable. "It wasn't a stupid idea," he said firmly. "It was a brave idea. To believe in your work that much, to send it out into the world with no guarantee, that takes more courage than most people will ever know." His words were a balm to her bruised confidence. The following Monday, an email appeared in her inbox. It was sleek and minimalist, bearing a simple logo, a stylized T. The subject line read, "Your proposal for the Hawthorne Mill." Her heart leapt into her throat. Her hands trembled as she clicked it open. "Dear Ms. Washington, we are in receipt of your unsolicited proposal regarding the Hawthorne Mill property. The submission is intriguing. We would like to invite you to our corporate headquarters to present your vision in person to our CEO and development board. Please be at 1 Thorn Plaza this Friday at 10 Nantol a.m. A car will be sent for you. Sincerely, the Office of the CEO Thorn Industries." Olivia read the email 3 times, convinced she was hallucinating. It was real. They wanted to see her. A wave of terror and elation washed over her. She immediately called Ethan. "You're not going to believe this," she said, her voice breathless. "Thorn Industries. They want me to present my proposal to the CEO." "That's incredible, Olivia." Ethan's voice was warm and encouraging, though she thought she detected a hint of a smile in his tone. "I knew they'd see the brilliance in it. You're going to be amazing." "I'm terrified, Ethan. What do I even wear? What do I say? I'll be walking into a boardroom full of sharks." "No," he said, his voice steady and calm. "You'll be walking into a room full of people who need to hear your idea. You're not there to impress them. You're there to educate them. Just be yourself. Tell them what you told me. Speak from your heart. They'll listen." His confidence in her was a shield. She spent the next 4 days preparing, rehearsing her presentation in her tiny apartment, talking to her reflection in the mirror. She used the last of her savings to buy a simple but elegant navy blue pantsuit. On Friday morning, a sleek, black, unmarked car arrived outside her building precisely at 9:15 a.m. The driver, a woman in a sharp suit, simply opened the door for her. The ride to First Thorn Plaza was silent and nerve-wracking. The building wasn't in the main financial district. It was a stunning, minimalist tower of black glass and steel that seemed to have appeared out of nowhere, a piece of the future dropped into the present day. The lobby was vast and silent, with white marble floors and a 50-foot waterfall cascading down one wall. There was no reception desk, just a single woman who greeted her by name, and led her to a private elevator. "They're waiting for you on the top floor, Ms. Washington." The elevator moved with impossible speed and silence. When the doors opened, Olivia stepped into a large, airy office space with panoramic views of the entire city. It wasn't a boardroom. It was a spacious, light-filled office, tastefully decorated with modern art and architectural models. A man in a suit approached her. "Ms. Washington, welcome. Mr. Thorne will be with you in just a moment." He gestured to a comfortable seating area. She sat on the edge of a leather couch, her portfolio clutched in her sweaty hands. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She was about to meet the mysterious Mr. Thorne, the man who held her future in his hands. The door to an adjoining office opened. Olivia took a deep breath, stood up, and plastered a professional smile on her face, ready to meet the titan of industry. And then he walked in. He was wearing a simple grey Henley and familiar, worn jeans. He stopped when he saw her, a gentle, apologetic smile on his face. It was Ethan. Olivia's mind went blank. The portfolio slipped from her fingers, scattering her carefully prepared presentation across the marble floor. She could only stare, her mouth half open, as the man she knew as a quiet programmer from a coffee shop walked toward her. "Olivia," Ethan Thorne said, his voice the same calm, kind voice she'd come to know so well. "I believe you have a presentation for me." The shock was a physical wave that rolled through Olivia, leaving her speechless. She stared at Ethan Thorne, as he calmly bent down and helped her gather the scattered pages of her proposal. You're, she stammered, unable to form a coherent sentence. "I'm sorry," he said, his expression sincere as he handed her the papers. "I know this is a shock. I should have told you who I was. But I needed to be sure." "Sure of what?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Of you," he said simply. "Your proposal landed on my desk 3 weeks ago. It was extraordinary. The most innovative and humane piece of architecture I'd seen in years. But ideas on paper are one thing. The person behind them is another. I needed to know if the architect was as authentic as the architecture." He explained everything. Thorne Industries was his creation, a quietly amassed portfolio of undervalued assets. He was a software billionaire who had retired from the tech world in his early 30s, seeking to use his fortune to invest in projects with long-term, meaningful impact. He avoided the press and the public eye, believing that true innovation happens in the quiet spaces, not in the spotlight. "I found out where you worked and which coffee shop you sometimes went to on your lunch break," he admitted, a faint blush on his cheeks. "The coffee spill, I swear, was an accident. But our conversation, that was not. I wanted to hear your passion in your own words, away from the pressure of a boardroom. And what I heard was even more impressive than what I read." Olivia sank back onto the couch, her head spinning. The man she had confided in, the kind stranger who had encouraged her, was one of the wealthiest and most reclusive men in the country. He hadn't just stumbled into her life. He had sought her out. "So this," she gestured around the stunning office. "This whole thing was a test." "No," he corrected gently. "It was a confirmation. The job is already yours, Olivia, if you want it. I don't just want to fund the Hawthorne Mill project. I want you to run a new division of my company, the Thorne Urban Renewal Division. You'll be the lead architect and director. You'll have an unlimited budget, your own hand-picked team, and complete creative control to find and revitalize forgotten spaces all over the country. The Hawthorne Mill will be your flagship project." Olivia felt tears welling in her eyes. It was too much to process. An unlimited budget, creative control, her own division. It was the kind of dream she hadn't dared to even form in her mind. "Why?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. "Why me?" "Because," Ethan said, his gaze direct and unwavering. "You see shelters for the human spirit, not just monuments to wealth. And so do I. I've been looking for a partner with your vision for a very long time." She took the job. The next few months were a whirlwind. Olivia Washington, the disgraced ex-wife, the overqualified draftsperson, ceased to exist. In her place, Olivia Washington, director of the Thorn Urban Renewal Division, emerged. Ethan was true to his word. She was given a stunning office in the Thorn Plaza building, a floor below his own. She assembled a dream team of the brightest young engineers, urban planners and designers in the country. People who, like her, were more interested in community and sustainability than in corporate profits. The news of the Hawthorne Mill project sent shockwaves through the architectural and real estate worlds. A mysterious billionaire backing a completely unknown architect on a project of unprecedented scale and ambition was the story of the year. Architectural Digest ran a feature. Forbes wrote a speculative piece on the enigmatic Ethan Thorne coming out of retirement. Olivia, once invisible, was now in the spotlight. She was confident, articulate, and utterly in command of her vision. The years of suppressing her own talent had created a reservoir of ideas that now came flooding forth. She wasn't just building a community center. She was creating a new model for urban living. The media fell in love with her story, the quiet genius finally given her due. Her relationship with Ethan deepened, evolving from a professional partnership into a close and intimate friendship built on mutual respect and shared values. He was her biggest champion, her confidant, and her partner in every sense of the word. The quiet joy she found in his company was a world away from the loud, hollow life she'd had with Mark. Meanwhile, in his gleaming tower across town, Mark Sterling read the articles with a growing sense of disbelief and fury. At first, he didn't believe it. His Olivia, the quiet, agreeable woman he had discarded. It had to be a different Olivia Washington. But then he saw the pictures. There she was, standing on the site of the old mill, looking radiant, powerful, and beautiful in a way he had never seen before. And beside her, looking at her with an expression of profound admiration, was the billionaire phantom, Ethan Thorne. A toxic cocktail of jealousy and wounded pride churned in his gut. It was his discovery, his creation. He had molded her, he told himself. This success, this brilliance, it should have been his. And he would find a way to get a piece of it back. Mark's world had begun to shrink. His relationship with Isabella was proving to be as shallow as he'd suspected. She was interested in the sterling lifestyle, not the sterling man. As his obsession with Olivia's success grew, his attention at home and at work waned. He made a series of risky financial decisions, trying to compete with the ghost of Thorne Industries, and they all backfired. His company, once a juggernaut, was now bleeding money. The Hamiltons, the investors he had celebrated locking down the night he broke Olivia's heart, were now threatening to pull their funding. He watched Olivia's ascent like a hawk. He saw her on the cover of Metropolis magazine. He watched a TV news segment where she passionately described her vision for the Hawthorne Mill, a vision built on the very eco-conscious principles he had once mocked as childish daydreams. Every mention of her name, every image of her confident smile was a personal affront, a judgment on his own life's choices. The final straw was the announcement of the annual National Architecture Guild Gala. The keynote address was to be delivered by the year's most talked-about new talent, Olivia Washington. It was the most prestigious event in the industry, and she was its star. Mark knew he had to be there. He secured a ticket through a desperate call to a contact on the board, telling himself it was for networking. But he knew the real reason. He needed to see her, to talk to her, to remind her of where she came from, to remind her that she was once his. He arrived at the gala, Isabella on his arm, and immediately felt out of place. The energy in the room was electric, and it was all centered around Olivia. People were buzzing about the Hawthorne project, about Thorne's backing, about the woman who had come out of nowhere to change the game. And then he saw her. She was standing in the center of a rapt circle of admirers, including the most revered architects in the world. She wore a simple, elegant black gown that showed off the strong lines of her shoulders. She wasn't wearing much jewelry, just a simple pair of earrings. She didn't need it. Her confidence was her greatest accessory. Beside her stood Ethan Thorne, not in the spotlight but just at its edge, a quiet, solid presence watching her with pride. They looked like a matched set, two powerful forces in perfect alignment. Mark's chest tightened. He made his excuses to Isabella and began to weave his way through the crowd. He needed to get to her before she took the stage. He intercepted her as she was making her way toward the main ballroom. "Olivia," he said, his voice smoother than he felt. She turned. Her expression didn't flicker. There was no shock, no pain, just a cool, calm recognition. It was the look one gives a stranger you pass on the street. "Mark," she said, her voice even. "You look incredible," he said, trying for his old charm. "I've been following your success, the Hawthorne Mill. It's fantastic. It reminds me of some of those old ideas you used to play around with." He was trying to plant a seed, to claim a piece of her triumph. "It is my old idea, Mark," she replied, her voice still level, but with an edge of steel he'd never heard before. "The one you told me to forget." Ethan had moved to stand beside her, his hand resting gently on the small of her back. He said nothing, but his message was clear. Mark felt a surge of possessive rage. "Listen, Liv," he said, lowering his voice, leaning in conspiratorially. "What you're doing is amazing. And what I'm doing, well, Sterling Properties is looking to move into the sustainable sector. I was thinking, we know how to work together. A collaboration. Sterling and Thorne. Imagine the headlines. We could be bigger than ever. Together." It was a desperate, pathetic plea, and they all knew it. He was trying to leech off her success to save his own failing company. Olivia looked at him, and for the first time she smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was sharp and full of a terrible, beautiful clarity. "A collaboration?" she repeated, her voice just loud enough for the people nearby to hear. "That's an interesting choice of words. Let me think. 10 years ago, I gave you my ideas, my talent, and my loyalty. And in return, you humiliated me in front of our friends and threw me out of my home. You told me I wasn't enough. You said I was holding you back." The small crowd around them had gone silent, all eyes on the unfolding drama. "Now," Olivia continued, her voice ringing with a power he had never known she possessed, "I have a multi-billion-dollar fund at my disposal. I am running my own division, and I am building the future I always dreamed of. And you, Mark, you come to me asking for a collaboration? Let me give you my answer." She leaned in, her eyes locking onto his. "You were right about one thing," she said, her voice dropping to a decisive whisper. "I was holding you back. I was holding you up. And now, I'm letting you go." She turned, without a backward glance, and walked toward the stage with Ethan at her side, leaving Mark standing alone in the crowd. He was surrounded by the whispers and stares of his peers, the architect of his own public ruin. The charm had finally failed him. He was no longer the shark, He was just a man who had thrown away a diamond and was now left with shattered glass. Olivia's keynote address was a triumph. She spoke not of steel and glass, but of dignity, community, and hope. She painted a vision of a future where cities were built for people, not just for profit. She received a standing ovation that lasted for 5 full minutes. Watching from the wings, Ethan Thorne knew he had made the best investment of his life. For Mark Sterling, the gala was the beginning of the end. The story of his public rejection by Olivia spread through the industry like wildfire. It wasn't just gossip, it was a character assessment. Investors, already wary of his company's failing finances, now saw him as a man with fatally flawed judgment. The Hamiltons officially pulled their funding the next day. His final, desperate hope was a major city contract for the redevelopment of the old naval yard, a project that could single-handedly save his company. He and his team worked around the clock, putting together a proposal that was a pale, corporate imitation of the principles Olivia championed. On the day of the presentation to the city council, Mark walked into the chamber, feeling a sliver of his old confidence. His proposal was solid, if uninspired. He was a known quantity. He still had a chance. Then the doors opened, and Olivia Washington walked in, followed by her team from the Thorne Urban Renewal Division. They were the competing bidders. Mark's blood ran cold. He sat through her presentation in a state of numb horror. It was breathtaking. She didn't just propose buildings. She proposed a living community, complete with affordable housing, public parks, a vocational school, and a small business incubator, all powered by cutting-edge clean energy. It was a plan that served the city, not just the developer. It was visionary. It was unbeatable. The city council's vote was unanimous. The contract was awarded to the Thorne Urban Renewal Division. The news was the final nail in the coffin for Sterling Properties. Within a month, the company declared bankruptcy. The vultures descended, picking apart the empire he had built on Olivia's stolen ideas. The penthouse was seized, the luxury cars were repossessed. Isabella, seeing that the money and prestige were gone, left him with a single, dismissive text message. One bleak afternoon, Mark found himself standing on a street corner, looking up at the skeletal frame of what was once his flagship project, Sterling Tower. The name was already being stripped from the building. He was a ghost in his own past, a failure haunted by the success of the woman he had so carelessly discarded. He turned on the small television in the window of a nearby electronics store, just as the local news was running a segment. There on the screen was Olivia. She was at the Hawthorne Mill site for the groundbreaking ceremony. She wore a hard hat and a radiant smile, her hand held firmly by Ethan Thorne. They stood together, looking at the plans, a true partnership of vision and values. The reporter called her the conscience of the city's skyline. Mark looked at his own reflection in the store window. He saw a tired, defeated man with nothing left but the bitter taste of his own words. He had tried to break her, to reduce her to nothing. Instead, he had set her free. He had told her she wasn't enough, and in doing so, he had forced her to discover that she was, and always had been, everything. As the wrecking ball of his own creation swung through his life, Olivia Washington was laying the foundation for a new one, a foundation built not on ego and greed, but on integrity, brilliance, and a quiet, unshakable justice. She wasn't just building a community hub. She was building a new world, one brick, one beam, one reclaimed dream at a time. The story of Olivia Washington is a powerful reminder that our true worth is never defined by those who choose to walk away. It's forged in the moments we choose to stand back up, to reclaim our voice, and to build our own future from the rubble of the past. Mark thought he was closing a door on her, but he was only opening a gate to a destiny far grander than he could ever have imagined. Olivia's journey from a silent partner to a celebrated visionary shows us that the most beautiful structures are often built on foundations of resilience and self-belief. What did you think of Olivia's incredible comeback? Was Mark's downfall the karmic justice he deserved? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were inspired by this story of triumph and transformation, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable real-life stories. Thank you for listening.